The career of Logan Sargeant was on the rocks long before this, but his accident during FP3 for the 2024 Dutch Grand Prix was enough to make James Vowles' head turn into a live reenactment of the Challenger space shuttle disaster. Williams' team principal was apoplectic, and after having a panic shag with Carlos Sainz, he had a decision to make. Sargeant's replacement looked to be one of two people, Mick Schumacher or Liam Lawson, and after James publicly violated the former, surely that leaves us with just the Kiwi in the car for the remainder of the season, no? Well, it wasn't that simple. Red Bull wanted to keep Lawson available in case he happened to be needed for one of their two teams, as if they hadn't decided to bum the Honey Badger already. So, with stability being the focus, Vowles signed a wild card, Argentine Formula 2 driver Franco Colapinto. On the face of it, this shouldn't have come as a huge surprise. Colapinto was, of course, front of the line in the outfit's junior academy. However, as we've all seen in recent years, F1 teams like to use their junior pools in the same way one would use a Jos Verstappen branded relationship guide. Franco then joined the team, having been on practically no one's radar, and I released this video, explaining why I thought this was an utterly terrible idea that would stunt the Argentine's growth and progression in the world of motorsport. But 3 races into his Formula 1 career, I think I can admit that I was wrong. In fact, I was very wrong. Franco's first race would be at the 2024 Italian Grand Prix, and if you could pick anywhere on the F1 calendar to make your debut, it would be here. Monza is simple. You put your foot down and you go fast. And if you have the biggest bollocks on the grid, you'll be able to go even faster. Relative to the rest of the calendar, this was an easy track to learn, and not one that puts a whole lot of stress on the body. Remember that just a week prior to this, Franco was preparing for the Formula 2 race here, which was half the length of the main F1 event, and that's provided you aren't wiped out by your French engine or Niels coolant before you've made it down to turn 1. This is also a circuit where we've seen the Williams car go well over the last couple of years, mainly because the team are yet to discover this concept called downforce, making their F1 machines utter monsters down the long Monza straights. Despite that, results weren't going to be the focus here. It's not like they were expecting points from Logan, and this was Colapinto's opportunity to bed himself in with the team and the new lump of carbon fibre around him. Being 7/10 off Albon in FP1 wasn't a huge shock then, the Argentine having a mostly clean hour, only dipping his car in the gravel at the Parabolica towards the end of the session. And besides, Kimi Antonelli had done that earlier in the day and been rewarded with a 2025 F1 seat, so I can see his logic here. Colapinto continued to progress in FP2, closing in to only be 0.2 of a second away from his teammate by the end of Friday. It had only been 2 hours in the car, and this guy was already miles closer than Sargeant ever was. Practice is one thing, however, and as Saturday rolled around, Colapinto would need to show that he could perform under pressure too. P9 and FP3, just one spot behind Alex, was a promising start, but in Q1, Franco found himself attracted to the gravel yet again, wrecking any hope of progressing and starting the Grand Prix down in 18th place, as Albon managed to make his way into the top 10 shootout. The race itself was a relatively uneventful one, though Colapinto was able to rise from his starting position to end the Grand Prix in 13th place. Nothing to write home about, don't get me wrong, but better than I think anyone expected from him in his debut weekend. As I said though, Monza was easy. Yes, it's a fast circuit, but also a forgiving one, and that's not really a word that can describe what came next. Baku is relentless. It doesn't take prisoners, it just takes you out back and shoots you in the head. Franco found this out the hard way in FP1, when he clipped the wall early, losing crucial preparation time around one of the toughest tracks on the calendar. This is what I was worried about when Franco was announced in the first place. Taking a driver to Baku for only their second ever race was like taking your dog for its first swimming lesson, then putting it on board the Titan submersible. And at this very moment, Colapinto's career could very easily have imploded too. But it didn't. Colapinto recovered in practice too, to set a near identical fastest lap time compared to teammate Albon. Admittedly, this is when we get a lot of the long running and aren't as interested in one lap pace, but then the feat was repeated on Saturday morning, and people were beginning to pay attention. Alex still looked to be the faster Williams driver, and come qualifying that afternoon, did stretch a little ahead of his teammate in the opening 2 sessions. Franco stayed with him, however, getting into Q3, and I know I've made this joke before, but maybe getting a little too excited over team radio.
Okay, you're through to Q3, mate.
Albon would remain the faster driver come the initial runs in that final part of qualifying, but driving off with a leaf blower stuck in his airbox wiped him out of the remainder of that session. Franco took advantage and snatched P9 away from his veteran teammate. Strategy wouldn't go his way in the race. That said, it at least wasn't as bad as whatever the RB decided to do to Daniel Ricciardo, and Colapinto found himself behind Albon as we got into the closing stages of the Grand Prix. It's Williams' straight-line prowess was still keeping the 21-year-old in contention for a point, which became a few more points when Sergio Perez started to wonder what he was doing on an F1 podium. In 2 race weekends then, Franco Colapinto has managed to achieve more than Logan Sargeant had in a season and a half. As gunshots rang out from the American's residence in Florida, the sport was moving on yet again, and this time to Colapinto's toughest challenge yet. In Baku, the walls want to kill you. In Singapore, the walls also want to kill you, provided the intense heat hasn't done so first. When the Marina Bay Street Circuit made its debut on the calendar in 2008, F1 decided it should be the place to hold one of the longest Grand Prix of the year, knowing that the drivers would at least get a break halfway through when one of them threw their multi-million-dollar car into one of the barriers and brought out the safety car. That was true for every instance of this race. From 2008 all the way to 2023, we'd have at least one intervention of Burt Maylander, but since air crash investigators were still trying to recover him from the barriers in Monza, the 2024 rendition of the event would go green from start to finish. Lining up an impressive 12th, having missed out to Albon by only 0.5 of a second in Q2, the Argentine knew his best chance of scoring another result would be to make moves down into turn 1. In fairness, every driver knew this, but none quite executed it the same way Franco did. Losing out a spot to Perez on the line, Colapinto utterly sent it down the inside of turn 1, making up 3 positions on the opening lap and scaring teammate Alex Albon so much he turned into a whiny bitch. Colapinto would have a Red Bull behind him, however, and while normally this might be a concern for a lot of drivers, A, this was the second half of 2024 and Red Bull was B, that Red Bull was only Sergio Perez, and C, this was Franco Colapinto. The Argentine held his own valiantly through the first half of the race, only losing out to Checo when Williams waited a millennia to put him onto the hard tyre. Despite this, he would remain stuck to the Mexican's tail, ending the Grand Prix just shy of more points in 11th. But having staked a claim to his spot on the Formula 1 grid. Fair to say I underestimated this kid, but did you really expect an FP1 video to age well in 2024? Now I want to be clear, by no means am I calling this guy the next Max Verstappen in the making. I mean he's not, but he's turning out to be a solid Formula 1 driver, and that's exactly what Williams need right now. Having looked at social media, the 21-year-old has already built up a significant fan base. Admittedly, that's never a great metric. Half of these guys were probably the ones still mental enough to support Agustin Canapino, and the other half like to rate F1 drivers by how desperately they want to f*** them. But when those crowds chant for this guy to be offered a full-time gig at the pinnacle of motorsport, I'm finding it hard to disagree. This guy single-handedly managed to make Alex Albon public enemy number 1. A supposed fraud who has been padding his stats against the likes of Gotifi or Logie Bear here. I'm not quite sure I can fully get behind that bit for now. I've even seen people quoting the fact he's already been out-qualified by the rookie, but those brain-dead goldfish on Twitter have seemed to forget that this was only because a dense Williams mechanic forgot his one and only job. However, the fact that Franco's managed to get so close to Alex in so little time is something we need to be paying attention to. And by the looks of things, the rest of the paddock might be as well. Williams have mentioned that they'd be open for talks with Sauber, who for now seem to have the only vacant drive left for 2025. I can't see this happening, either Bortoletto or the stripper will end up in that car for me. However, if Liam Lawson really is here to assassinate Sergio Perez, maybe there's a spot open at V-Carb for next season. Actually, let's not do that again. More realistically, Colapinto will likely become 2025's Liam Lawson. That person the cameras always pan to when someone in the mid-pack has an accident or a bad lap or is caught masturbating in his ice bath. I wouldn't know, as a Ricciardo fan I've been looking away from the screen recently. That all means he may well see a future in Formula 1, and despite me being a Brit and thus hard-coded to make a comment about the Belgrano and the fact these are still ours, I really hope we do see him beyond this year. Now let's watch him tank these last 6 races and make me wrong yet again. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Now what are yours? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please do drop it a like and a sub to help the channel grow. For anyone who missed it, my mini documentary on Daniel Ricciardo went live earlier this week, and is possibly the longest and most work I've ever put into a single project. So if you want to check out that one after this, the card is somewhere on screen around now. Final thank you has to go out to my patrons and channel members, who got early access to this video, and if that sounds interesting to you, or you just want to further support the channel, you can do so by heading down to the links in the description below. I'll be back next week with more content on something, but until then, have a good one.